Hey everyone, my name is Jack. Welcome back to the channel. I cover a variety of topics as they relate to real estate, investing, the markets, and pretty much everything as it has to do with personal finance. So if you like that sort of content, be sure to have a look around the channel, and if you like what you see, be sure to subscribe. Today is the Friday after Election Day of 2020, and it is time for me to do an obligatory post-election video. As of right now, barring some crazy sort of lawsuit magic from Trump, it looks like Joe Biden is going to win the presidential election. Meanwhile, it looks like Republicans are going to be maintaining their majority in the Senate with at least 50 seats, but probably 51 seats. And they ended up gaining a few seats in the House as well, but Democrats look like they're going to be in control of the House still. So we'll have at least another 2 years of divided government where multiple parties control different parts of our government between the executive and the legislative branches. And of course, there'll be carryover from all the judicial appointees that the Trump administration made that could go on for years or less, depending on how long these judges serve. So you get lots of checks and balances within the system when you have this sort of divided government. But I want to go over what I think the election means for the coming years when it comes to investing, business, and the economy in general. I'm not a financial advisor, and more importantly, I do not know what the future will hold, and neither do you, so my prediction is not necessarily worth any more than someone else's. I'm just going to give you my hot take on what I think might happen. You could take it for whatever you think it's worth. The short version is, I don't think much is going to change with the path that we're heading on. Republicans showed us this summer that they're definitely very willing to dish out tons of money that they don't actually have because of Fed printing, and that is going to continue, I would assume, under this new Biden administration, again, assuming nothing crazy happens and Trump is reinstated. While Republicans don't want to spend as much as Democrats, generally, they are still willing to spend. After all, they had offered a second stimulus program just before the election for over $1 trillion, and Democrats didn't think that was enough, but that still is a lot of money. And this is on the heels of the $2 trillion stimulus package that both the Republican Senate and the Democratically controlled House, with Donald Trump as president, had passed back in the late spring. Again, this was not with any money that the government actually had and was financed almost entirely with Fed printing and quantitative easing. Both parties have seemed to have completely forgotten about the national debt. It used to be a pretty big issue, at least when I was growing up before I got into politics. I remember the debt being something that both parties at least pretended to be concerned about, but I really don't think that's the problem anymore. Both parties have either conceded or simply don't care about the national debt issue and are focusing on many other issues instead. Personally, I think the national debt issue is going to be one of the biggest, if not the biggest issue that we're going to face over the next 50 to potentially even 100 years. In the short run, debt spending doesn't seem like a problem. We've been doing it for a very, very long time at a very, very high rate, and seemingly there has been no ill effects from it. And for the most part, that's pretty true. Things have been pretty good because of our debt spending in the short run. However, because there's no more room for the Fed to cut rates, because the country is already incredibly leveraged, both at the private and public level, and because both the government and the Fed have shown a true willingness to just keep printing out as much money as possible, I think the biggest threat we're going to face is an incredibly high inflation rate. Whether that's in the next year, the next 10 years, or the next 20, or maybe more, I'm not too sure, but it looks like it's going to be sooner rather than later in my view. Before we kept kicking this can down the road by slashing interest rates, but again, there's nowhere left for interest rates to go, and the government is going to keep spending. Maybe not as much as if it was a completely democratically controlled government, but it's going to keep spending for sure. Spending when you have the treasury to spend isn't as much of a problem since you're just taking money out of the economy and then putting it right back in, so hopefully it would be about the same as if you had just left it in the whole time, and maybe you're helping out a disadvantaged group. That's the idea with government spending at least. But the way we use government spending is through debt spending, by taking future production value, aka the debt we're taking now that we're going to have to pay later, to then pay for things now. And the things we're paying for now aren't necessarily investments in anything. Oftentimes it's just transfer payments, and currently we had the stimulus program, we have lots of unemployment programs right now. I'm not saying those aren't important, but they're incredibly expensive, and we don't have the money to pay for it with our current treasury. So the way we pay for it is by printing, and that is going to catch up with us at some point. The alternative would be austerity, where you have high taxes and low government spending, but I really don't see that being politically tenable in our very short-term minded government system, where you have lots of turnover with the House of Representatives every 2 years, and you have the same thing in the Senate every 6, and the President every 4. Those are relatively short terms in the grand scheme of an economic cycle, which could take decades or even centuries, depending on what we're talking about. Government officials are laser focused on the short run and typically don't really care about the long run because that's what they're incentivized to do. This goes for either party, and they just do it in different ways generally. Social issues between the parties may be more hotly debated than the economic ones right now, since it seems like both parties are on the same page in thinking that the way to get out of this crisis is to continue debt spending, which might be true, but all you're really doing is kicking the crisis crisis further down the road, and then that ultimate crisis is going to be much bigger than it would be if we just dealt with it now. But politicians are in the game of giving it to someone else and putting the blame on them rather than actually solving it now and taking the blame. What does that mean for an investor? Well, that doesn't really change a whole lot. We've been in a system for a long time where the government props up asset bubbles, where the government devalues currency, so you're incentivized to get into real assets or assets that actually appreciate with inflation rather than those that lose value like currency. That could be through real assets, that could be through paper assets as well. Really any asset that has some sort of inflation protection built in because it has inherent value. Currency has the value that we assign to it. We say this is worth $1, but what $1 can get you is what changes when you start printing a bunch more money. The only thing you can really do as an investor is, one, diversify into multiple asset classes and ideally asset classes that aren't correlated, and also diversifying your political risk as well, since certain states and certain countries are going to act differently. So if you can put your investments in different countries or assets that come from different countries, that can help diversify your political risk too, which is increasingly becoming more relevant in my view. This might not be feasible for a smaller investor, but as you accumulate more assets, it might be really keen to start paying attention to that as well. But the second one, in addition to diversification, is to buy things that you think are cheap. If you think there's good value in something, you're getting it at a good price, maybe it's a piece of real estate that's under market value, that has room to appreciate, that has good cash flow metrics, that could be a good investment to go for in any climate. Maybe there's a stock that's undervalued. I identified CVS a while back as being undervalued. I bought into that, and now it's up big today because its earnings were really good, and so far so good with that. That could be another example. I'm not saying these things are easy to find, and of course there's a lot of short-term fluctuations that come with any investment, but ideally you want to get something that you think is underpriced. That way when the price corrects itself, or you hold on to it for the long term, hopefully you'll start making some real profits that are much greater than what inflation is. But at the least, you'll still keep up with inflation, which is important in itself. That's really all I wanted to talk about today. Being an investment-oriented channel, I don't really want to get into social issues with politics and all that. While they are very relevant to our everyday life, they are not necessarily relevant to the content that I want to focus this channel on. But of course, politics does intertwine with investing and business and regulations and all that stuff, so I do want to keep an eye on it at all times. So anyways, if you like this video, please like it since it helps the channel out a lot. If you want to see more of this sort of policy-oriented content or content about the greater financial system, definitely let me know in the comments below and leave a like. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new updates since I put out new videos every single week. And check out my book, The One Property Retirement, about a simple strategy for building your retirement nest egg using real estate. It's great for beginners who might be new to the real estate game since it takes you from the very beginning of the process and running the numbers and vetting a deal through the closing process and getting to the closing table, as well as beyond that with maintaining and renting out the property. If you end up reading the book, definitely leave a review on Amazon since that would help me out a lot. But until next time, take care.